Yay! Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Yay. Ray and Lex, Phil, Alan, welcome. For some of you, welcome back. Feel free to come onto camera and just wave it out. You don't have to stay on camera. You don't have to come on camera if you're eating your lunch during your break. It's all good. Welcome back to many of you. I've seen some of you in the last meetup. Welcome. Excellent. I would encourage you all to share in the chat where you're zooming from. Hi, Christine. Welcoming folks. I will welcome you all to please share in the chat where you're joining us from. Where are you zooming in from? Welcome back, Bernard. I am zooming in from Ashland, Oregon, in the conference room at the rehearsal hall at the HPRC. I'm finishing up my contract at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and then I will be back in the Bay. Yes. Cupertino's in the house, San Francisco, of course. Yes, Neil. And I'm also welcoming you to share where you're zooming in from according to native land. So I'm zooming in from Ashland, Oregon, which is also the lands of the Shasta, Takelma, and Latgawa people. I've shared in the chat a link that you can look up where, yes, Chichenyo Alone, presente. Hi, Diana. Great. If you would all like to use emojis or like raise your hands or put it in the chat, how many of you joined us last time for our Let's Talk About, for the first one that we did, our Let's Talk About with Dr. Will Tosh? Yay, I see hands, I see thumbs up. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us for this one. Last time we were focused on As You Like It and our Shakespeare on Tour. That is also available in recording, which Toby has put in the chat, that you can revisit should you so choose. We're so grateful to have Dr. Will Tosh come in and share what a wonderful conversation with Dan and myself, like talking about As You Like It and the time and some connections to Marlowe. Quite cool. Yes. Today we are focusing on the Tempest, and we have Rotimi Agbabiaka talking with Dan Rabinowitz about Rotimi, our director for this season. So excited for him to share his thoughts and his vision for this year's Free Shakes in the Park. And then our next one will be Monday, July 8th at 12 noon Pacific time with Dr. Farah Karim Cooper. And so if you would like to, if you have not yet, if you would like to and you have not yet, please RSVP, come on in for that one on July 8th. That will also be focusing on the Tempest. And just like today, we're focusing on the Tempest of our Free Shakes show. And yeah, so excited. I'm so excited for these. And then we'll have another one further afield where we will talk with the cast and company of The Tempest, of this year's Free Shakes in the Park. Great. And I do want to say thank you so much to those of you who have RSVP'd already and have sent in questions, which is great because it helps. Like, if there's questions that were bubbling up for a lot of folks, we shared them with Rotimi and Dan so that they can focus and talk about some of those. At the end, we're going to have time for some questions that you can shoot in the chat, raise your hand. We can, and time permitting, have some of those like buzzing around and talk. And with that, I think we can get started and have this. Let's get this party started. Edmund, thank you for joining us.
Great. Carla, thank you very much. And we owe a huge debt of thanks to Rotimi, who is taking time from his own performance schedule, as well as the schedule of preparing for our show of The Tempest this summer, to join us. Before we start, I wanted to just say a couple of sentences that kind of frame this extraordinary play, this remarkable, wonderful, gleaming piece of art, because it occupies a very special position for those of us who love Shakespeare and know about Shakespeare, and that's pretty much everybody who is logged in today. In a sense, The Tempest is both, I almost see it as almost the alpha and the omega of Shakespeare's corpus of work. It's the omega because The Tempest is the last play that Shakespeare wrote himself. There are two later plays that we have, Henry VIII and Two Noble Kinsmen, which he wrote in conjunction with John Fletcher. There is a third, which has been lost forever, Cardenio, also written in conjunction with John Fletcher. But The Tempest, which was first performed at court in 1611, was Shakespeare's last work. It is the last of the four great romances that Shakespeare wrote, of Pericles, Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, and The Tempest. It is by far the greatest work of art of the romances, and just an extraordinary, wonderful play. So we know about Omega. Why I also say that it's alpha is because I have always believed that there was deep intentionality in 1623 when Henry Condell and John Hemmings brought out the first folio of Shakespeare's work, the first ever collection of plays ever published. 7 years after Shakespeare's death. Both Hemmings and Condell were close friends of Shakespeare's, as well as members of the King's Men, formerly the Lord Chamberlain's men. And when they brought out the first folio, The Tempest is the first play in the folio. Page 1 of the folio is The Tempest. And while there are some scholars who think that's because they had a better script to hand to the compositors at Jaggard and Company who were putting this together, I don't believe that for a moment. There was deep intentionality there. So with that framing of this extraordinary play, and a play that in some ways bookends this extraordinary career, let's start by asking Rotimi a question which has been on all of our minds, and which came up often in the questions that you guys were kind enough to send in already, which is, how did you come to The Tempest for this summer's production? Because this really was a Rotimi choice and Rotimi's decision on this. How did you bring it? What was it that brought you to The Tempest for San Francisco Shakespeare in the summer of 2024?
Sure, thanks, Dan. Yeah, as you said, it's such a wonderful play. I've seen some really great productions of it. I remember seeing the Mark Rylance production at the Globe, where
Yeah.
three actors played all the parts with some dancers as well, and that was just wonderful. And then I recently saw a production in 2022 that was also so wonderful. Um, and when the opportunity came to apply for this position, SF Shakes, opened up the directing possibilities to folks to apply. And so I submitted a proposal, and this is one of the plays I proposed. And um, And the reason I chose it was because it just felt like something, it's so timeless, but it felt especially relevant now. This play, there's something accessible about this fairy tale, right? That anyone can sort of follow along with. And it's a story of betrayal and loss and the potential for revenge. His enemies are all in his grip. And then what does he do? He forgives. And at a time when it seems like there's so much fracturing, so much division, so much expression of past grievances and wrongs, and it seemed like a time to do a play about someone who has the chance, that fantasy that we probably all have of having our enemies in our grip, and then what he decides to do with his enemies is to forgive them.
It's interesting, Rotimi, that you frame it that way. There are so many different lenses through which modern audiences come to The Tempest. In some ways, I think this is a very deep insight, this sense of The Tempest as a play about character and a play about individual characters and individual actors in this, in this wonderful way. And it's a deep insight, I think, into the play and into what Shakespeare actually intended, that we focus in this production, or we will begin to focus in this production, on these questions of revenge, forgiveness, and of, this wonderful combination of character and politics all interspersed together.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think, yeah, it's a play, and so in a play, the characters are sort of who drive what's going on, or we understand human nature, we understand the politics at play, or the way it reflects politics throughout the ages through the actions of human beings, or fairy magical creatures who act like human beings. And
Yes.
so I think our approach definitely would be to really bring these characters to life, and to also see how each of them, right, every single one of them has valid arguments for the positions, right? I think that's part of the beauty of diversity, is that we all come from different backgrounds, but we have perspectives that are valuable, right? Or we have perspectives that hold truth, and part of the project of our humanity is how do we hold all those truths alongside each other, or coexist even with truths that are not exactly the same. And I think what I love about this play is that each character, right? Caliban has his perspective, which is very different from Prospero's perspective, which is very different from Antonia's perspective. And we might look at some of the characters and say, okay, objectively, they do things that are villainous. But, the cardinal rule, I think, in acting is you don't judge a character, you just try to understand them. And I think we're going to try to understand every single one of these characters and place them up against each other, and let the audience, figure out what they think, or what they take away from this the conflicts that play out on stage.
It's interesting in the sense that your emphasis on character and characterization, and on what I think all of us find when we come to see a play by Shakespeare, which is the extraordinarily vivid and realistic way in which Shakespeare can portray and differentiate characters, even in a sentence or two in a particular play. What's interesting about this, in some ways, Rotimi, which has struck me, is this approach really harkens back. One of the people that I love to read about Shakespeare, and I think in many respects the greatest of the 18th century Shakespeare critics. I leave Edmund Malone to one side, but I always start with Dr. Johnson. And
Mm-hmm.
when Johnson, I went back and I looked at what Johnson said about this play, because it is so apposite to exactly what you are working with. And what Johnson said was, and I'm quoting here, I'm taking the liberty of actually reading it because it's so good. He said, "But whatever might be Shakespeare's intention in forming or adopting the plot, he has made it instrumental to the production of many characters, diversified with boundless invention, and presented with profound skill in nature, extensive knowledge of opinions, an accurate observation of life. And I just think that's so wonderful as a comment from reaching across centuries to us from the Augustan age. And it focuses so much on exactly what you're proposing to do with the play. So have you had your first read with the cast yet?
We haven't had the first read of the entire cast. We had a workshop of the script in March, and we had most of the cast present, but not everyone was able to be there. And so we'll be having our first read of the cast in a little over a week, next Tuesday, when we have our first rehearsal of the summer. So I'm very excited for that. But our workshop in March was really wonderful. We got to read through the script, have discussions, get on our feet and play around and begin to think about staging. We did some devising to sort of get some images and ideas and physical themes. So, and it was just such a wonderful week. We have such an amazing group of artists bringing this play to life, and so I'm really excited for our first official read through next Tuesday.
You know, Rotimi, one of the things that is so wonderful about San Francisco Shakespeare Festival and about the way in which these plays are presented is that your work and the work of the actors who will be working with you in this is much closer, both in reality and in spirit, to the way in which these plays were presented to an Elizabethan audience. You know, we moderns are accustomed to sitting in darkness in a theater in which somebody opening up a cough drop 2 rows away is annoying to everybody, and watching, you know, a brightly lit proscenium arch and a stage with an invisible fourth wall. That's not at all the way these plays were presented at the Globe or the Rose or the theater in Elizabethan times. And
Mhm.
our presentation in an open setting with shared light, shared sound, is so much closer to the way the Elizabethans actually saw these plays. How do you do that? What are some of the differences that you work with as a director and as an actor when you're making the transition from a modern theater to the way we do things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing is, yeah, like you said, we have this shared space between the audience and the performer. So there is no fourth wall. There is no, pretending that we're in some enclosed space that no one is present at, right? The audience is right there. And so one just very practical thing that we do is, and we're going to be doing this summer, is we speak to the audience, right? Any of the moments that might be private moments in a typical play are moments to be shared with the audience, right? You're falling in love with someone, you turn to the audience and go, is this the right person? Or, oh God, I love this person. I hope my father, agrees with me, right? And the audience, I mean, I think about audience engagement and I think, wow, well, the most basic audience engagement is that kind of involvement in the play, literally helping the characters decide, should I do this or should I not, right? Going on them with that journey. And what I love about Shakespeare and the way that we do it at SF Shakes and the way that, it was originally done is that there is such a direct connection and such a way of bringing the audience along that I think, yeah, is not quite the same when you have a more contemporary approach with that separation, right? It's much more involved, much more accessible, much more encompassing, right? And also, yeah, and I think, like you mentioned at the cough drop, I think there is a lack of that sort of reverence that I think really adds to the fun. I'll go just say one little story because I think this is good. But I once did a production of a panto, a British panto. And the director said that he thinks one of the reasons why theater is much more popular in England than the US is that young children, their first exposure to theater is that they go to the panto where you can yell at the stage, candy gets thrown at you, you're not told to be quiet and sit in the dark. And so to them, theater is fun. It's not a chore. It's not a, And so I think similarly, Shakespeare is in that same tradition of, engaging the audience in a way that does not tell them to be quiet or to suppress themselves, but involves them and lets them know that theater is a site of fun and not of, too much reverence.
Well, it's an engagement that's just extraordinary, and the absence of the fourth wall, I think is very special. I'm sure it's sometimes frightening for actors who are used to appearing with the comfort of the fourth wall between them and the audience. You'll probably have to work with your actors to get them out there and engaged
Yeah.
in that open fashion on this.
Well, the great thing about the actors in our cast is that so many of them are ready for this. They're we have
Yes.
actors who've done stand-up comedy, who've done drag, who've done art forms that are much more akin or used to this idea of a very present and vocal and rowdy sometimes audience. And so many of our performers are already up to the task of engaging in that wonderful direct way.
How do you see the relationship between Prospero and Miranda as translating itself into a modern context, into the context of a 21st century parent and daughter or and son or daughter? Let's not be too
Yeah,
specific here.
absolutely. Yeah, well, I think, yeah, as you said, like the core relationship is that of a parent and a child. And I think, we'll talk, I'm sure, a little bit more directly about casting, but I think even in our casting, we're portraying this family unit that encompasses, all sorts of gender expression of that relationship, and really just focuses on the core relationship, which is a parent and a child. I think that's one that remains the same throughout the ages, right? That same bond. I mean, you look at the script and you see Miranda kind of mouthing off to her dad.
Yes,
And her dad saying, "Listen to me, be quiet, sit down, obey." Right?
yes.
And and it's very relatable. I mean, it's the same kind of conversations or relationship that we see witness today between a teenage child and their parent. And all of that, love and concern, right? Trying to ensure they have a good future, trying to ensure that they're safe, that they're protected. Um, and then we see the things that Prospero does to try to make that happen, and we can decide if Prospero appeals to us. I think the audience, as much as to Miranda, to say, "This is why I did this. I'm doing it for you," and we can decide what we think of that. But I think that core relationship is one that continues to remain unchanged. Right? We see so many of the same issues appearing even today, and I think that's part of the beauty of the play is that it's still now, even though it was written 400 years ago.
Well, it's, I must say that I confess that there are times when I listen to Prospero and I don't see my own best self as a parent.
He's not perfect, that's for sure. um,
So I guess this is a kind of an off the wall question, Rotimi, but it's one that I
sure.
think is in some ways is well put to the director, who is a kind of a Prospero-like character in a production like
Mhm,
this.
mhm.
Is Prospero going to be a better Duke when he returns to Milan after after these events? What do you think?
I think so, actually. That's what I would. Yeah, I think one of the journey of the play, I think, is for this person who, in many ways, was not as much a part of the world as he could have been, as
Right.
should have been. You might even say, and now is in a place where he's not part of the world at all. He's on an island, nowhere, in the middle of nowhere, right? And it's interesting in the story of his betrayal and usurpation of his throne by his brother. I think we always assume, oh yeah, Antonio was wrong, but there is something to the idea that Prospero
Mm,
neglected his duties. He locked himself up in a room and was, neglecting his responsibility as the ruler of the kingdom, and was supplanted by someone who we might even imagine was a better ruler in some ways than he was, right?
right.
And so I think part of what happens over the course of the play is that he learns how to be in the world, right? And he also learns um, that there's something more important, I think, than his magic, than his revenge, and I think that that lesson comes about by witnessing the young love, and realizing that we're all mortal. I mean, that wonderful speech where the stuff that dreams are made on, what is the point of life? And I think in some ways the point of life becomes for him the continuation of a more harmonious existence that is promised by Miranda and Ferdinand. And so I think those lessons um, will make him a better Duke once he returns to Milan.
Because the play is the last play that Shakespeare wrote himself, there has been perhaps an emotionally driven sense that we can read the latter portions of Prospero's speeches as he breaks his staff and renounces this rough magic as being a kind of a metaphor for Shakespeare's willingness to renounce active participation as the great playwright of his age and return and rusticate himself in Stratford as a
Mhm.
member of the gentry and agricultural investor. I think one can carry that too far. I think it's always a mistake not to see the arc rather than
Mhm.
some kind of direct biographical chain. But I do think, and I'd be very much interested in your thoughts, I do see that Prospero's renunciation must have been something that was on Shakespeare's mind in his own life. It's such a vivid characterization of that
Mhm.
transition. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's so many parallels, and I definitely think, when you look at the play, that Prospero, functions in many ways like a theater maker. He gets these spirits to perform for
Right,
him,
right,
literally perform,
right.
put on a play in the middle of the play. He, the magic, and that's part of what we're leaning into with our production too, is right. The sort of themes we're exploring are the transformative power of magic, which is, sort of a metaphor for the transformative power of theater, right? How can we create this kind of theatrical magic, and Prospero creates a magic that is akin to theater. So there are many parallels, I think, to ways that we might consider him a parallel of Shakespeare as a theater maker. Um, it's tough because I think, Shakespeare, you read the plays and it's really hard to tell, I think, like what Shakespeare's message is, or who his which character he, sides with or identifies with, and so I hesitate to draw too many and I think ultimately um what seems to be a good approach for me, and in thinking about putting on a place, thinking about it in terms of the character and the story. And I absolutely, I imagine, as with any writer, that Shakespeare drew from his life and from his own experiences and his own thoughts and insecurities and desires. And so I'm absolutely sure that there is a lot of his experience or his feelings about his work as a theater maker, the magic of theater. When is it time to put it down? Um, but I can't say for sure, right, like
None
how
of us.
direct it is. And definitely in the context of Prospero's story, it's such a powerful moment of this person who has created so much. I mean, that speech where he talks about, I've raised corpses from the grave, I've stopped the sun, I've
Yes.
pulled down mountains. He's done so. I mean, yeah, of course, it sounds like a valedictory speech, which I'm sure Shakespeare must have thought about. Imagine, the comparisons to his own accomplishments, and to be at a point where you go, okay, I've done all that, and I can just put it down, and focus on something else, right? He says every third thought will be my grave, which is so morbid, but also, you know, also what happens at a certain stage in life, I think, and so that's
Maybe
the
so,
beauty, right?
maybe so grown up. It is
Yeah, maybe it's a
always
level of grown up.
possible.
Yeah, where you're like, okay, I've done all the things, and now I can just put my feet up and just enjoy the rest of my life, what's left of it. Yeah.
So, Rotimi, one of the things that is so fascinating about Tempest, not just because it is his last play and such a great work, is in a lot of other plays, Shakespeare would incorporate songs from popular popular culture, what was then
Mhm,
existing popular culture. If you think back to some
mhm,
of the songs in Twelfth Night, some of the songs in As You Like It, these are songs
mhm,
which his audience knew, songs where they understood it, they had heard the melodies, they knew the lyrics. Tempest is different. The two great songs in Tempest, Full Fathom Five, Thy Father Lies, and Where the Bee Sucks, There Suck I, are composed songs for this.
mhm,
We actually know what the origin of those songs are. There's a very interesting little story about that. They were written by an enormously talented young musician named Robert Johnson. Robert was the son of a very musical family. His father, his late father, John Johnson, was one of the leading Elizabethan lutenists.
mhm,
John Johnson died in 1594 when Robert was about 11 or so. And Robert became an indentured servant in the household of, as a musician, in the household of George Carey, second Baron Hunsdon, whom we all know, those of us who know and love Shakespeare, we all know by his job title because he was the Lord Chamberlain. And he was the patron of Burbage and Shakespeare's company. They were the Lord Chamberlain's men until 1603 and Elizabeth's death and James's accession. And we happen to know that Robert Johnson, after he finished his indenture in Carey's household, actually became a professional composer working with the King's Men, then the King's Men, which would have been natural because he had come from the Lord Chamberlain's household. And so he knew the company and they knew him. And these two songs were written by Robert Johnson. We know that from a later publication, quite a bit later. But we know the music as well as the lyrics, and I love thinking about this young man who was about 26 when he sat down with Shakespeare to write these two songs, sort of the proto-Elizabethan Stephen Sondheim, working with Shakespeare as his lyricist. So I'm really interested to hear what you guys are planning, if it's not too big a spoiler, what you guys are planning to do with the two great songs in Tempest.
Yeah. Well, we have a wonderful composing team, Jen Coogan and Justin Reyna, and they've been working on music, composing music
Right.
to put to the words
Right.
of the songs. And so I think in doing that work, we've been working on it for the past few months, and I think we started out with like what is the dramatic function of the song, like what is it doing in the play, right? And so based on that, we've on our exploration of that, we've identified some things, and then we are translating, as you mentioned, these were songs that were popular, or popular music of the time, and so we're finding contemporary versions or contemporary rhythms and sounds that evoke the vibe or evoke the dramatic purpose,
Right.
and so. And with our sort of uninhabited island and the kind of world music, I would say, kind of
Yes.
soundscape of art. So we were really sort of inspired by artists like Angelique Kidjo, King Sunny Ade, Fela Kuti, to create music that sort of is inspired by their sound. So when you come see the show, you'll hear sort of a contemporary vernacular of music, of sort of world music, applied to these lyrics in ways that evoke, what they're doing dramatically in terms of the full fathoms deep, right? There's that sort of seductive slash mystical nature to it, right? It's a song that's drawing Ferdinand in, and it has a sweetness to it, but also a strange melancholy. And similarly, where the bee sucks, right? There's sort of a farewell that Ariel is giving, as well as I think sort of an assurance that he's everywhere or he's around,
Yes.
and so we've played around with how to bring this to life using contemporary music, and I'm really excited for audiences to hear what Justin and Jen have come up with.
I'm extremely excited now. I'm really tantalized about this, Rotimi. But and that's just so appropriate as well, both to bring in contemporary musical themes, but also to broaden the geographical reach of all of this. It's one of the wonderful things. I mean, Shakespeare was always a little careless with geography. A playwright who gave us the seacoast of Bohemia is not somebody who's really worrying about. Not somebody you'd give a chart and compass to get you somewhere. But the location of the island, sort of in the Mediterranean, but borrowing from all of this contemporary literature about the voyages to the Virginia colony and the Bermudes, gives you such wonderful latitude in terms of how you can pull in musical themes.
Absolutely.
That's exciting.
Just fun. Yeah.
That's really exciting. So what are some of your what were your ideas when you were casting this? How did you go about casting a play like this? How does a wonderfully creative young director approach the process of casting? What's
Yeah,
in your mind as you're thinking about this?
yeah. Well, I think, thinking about the theme of the transformative power of theater, and also the idea that S.F. Shakes really upholds, that Shakespeare is for everyone, right?
Yes,
I began to think, okay, how do we cast this for the essence of the character as opposed to any preconceived expectations we may have about who gets to play these roles, or who, what gender a person is, or should be, or could be. And so that became the guiding principle. Like, okay, we're casting for the essence of the character, right? Not for certain superficial markers, or markers I consider superficial, right? And so, beginning with Prospero, we know we wanted someone who could really embody that love and care and concern of a parent, and also the fiery rage of a person wronged
right,
who has magical powers, who
right.
could really do some damage,
Yes.
and then chooses not to. And so we and so the actor that could really do that is Idris Cooper Adifowoshe, who's going to be playing Prospero this summer, who's a wonderful theater maker in the Bay Area, director, performer, writer, teacher, and she yeah, really, embodies all of those things in such a wonderful way. And so yeah, so we began with that, and then as we went into the process, yeah, we were really sort of open in the casting process. We're really open to who shows up, and or who, we have people in mind, but also the auditions are very open, and as they went on, our ideas of who would play the roles changed when someone would come in, um,
Right.
and really sort of embody and show us, oh wow, the wonderful actor Alex Camarino, who's playing Miranda, originally was coming in to audition for Ariel, but when
Right.
they came in, they had such a yeah, they just have the essence, right? That innocence and that rapacious desire for knowledge, and for embracing this brave new world, that she talks about. And we thought, oh my God, like this is, that's Miranda, and
Yes.
so, and likewise with so many, with all the actors in the production, and as you'll see in the casting, people are playing, yeah, genders that are not the genders um that the characters are written to be, or actors who have different gender identities are playing these characters, and we've played around even with maybe even some of the expectations around ethnicity of who would play these roles, to really sort of embrace what I believe, that is that we are all Prospero, we're all Caliban, we are all Ferdinand, we're all Miranda. Like any of us could be any of these people, and they all reflect qualities and attributes and behaviors that are universal among all people, and that anyone can embody. So that was our guiding principle, and we've assembled a really, really exciting, wonderfully diverse and varied and thrilling group of actors
Well,
in the process.
I'm thrilled to hear this discussion because this accords so much with the way we try to approach things at SF Shakes in general, on the artistic side and in terms of all of the rest of our work as well. And it always bears remembering that the Victorian conventions, which bled over into the first 2/3 of the 20th century in the UK and in the United States about casting, were wholly at variance with the Elizabethan notions about casting, in which you would often have a boy playing a girl playing a boy. And so there's a baked in gender fluidity there, which was lost as things became more calcified and sexist. I have to add, in American and English theater. And it's wonderful to think of this. It's as I think of it as really coming back to our roots as Shakespeare players, in the sense that every Shakespeare play and every Shakespeare character is an exercise of the imagination. And it's an actor's ability to carry that imaginative conception to the audience that matters, not what they look like or who they were before they stepped on the stage. And that's just, this is exciting, Rotimi. This is clearly going to be a great production.
Yeah, I'm gonna come in right now, Dan, because
Yeah.
it's 12:40. We'd love to get, I see that there's already some questions in the chat. Thank you, Diana. Just also highlighting what I love about where Rotimi is thinking with his casting when he was talking about Alex, in that many times with plays, we see gender roles being very narrow. Like Miranda can only be the wide-eyed innocent who's played quasi like a stereotypical ingenue, whereas without thinking about the context of having grown up on an island and having to do for oneself.
Right.
And I really appreciate the lens and the care that Rotimi is looking at. Yeah, we have some questions that came into us prior, but feel free, please pop some questions into the chat. Magic was one of those big questions, Diana, of like this magic here in the Tempest. Is it real? Is it a dream? Who's Many people will take that and choose how they want to. Where are you at, Rotimi?
With the magic question. It's real. It's as real as the play. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think yeah, the magic. I mean, I think in the world of the play, in the over the course of a few hours, because it's one of the things about the play too is that it happens in real time. So the events in the play are happening as we're in the same amount of time that we're watching them, right? So in those 2 to 4 hours, in our production will be 90 minutes, but 2 to 4 hours, the magic is real. I think Prospero. I believe that Prospero has pulled up, from the grave. I believe that there's a storm that's happened that Prospero, through Ariel, is controlling. And I think for us, right, in producing the play, um, for me, I think of the magic as a metaphor for theater, right? It's the way that you can take a sheet of fabric and say, okay, this is now the sea, or this is now we're now on a ship. It's imagination. And so I think if we can imagine that, yeah, that a 21st century person is a 16th century king, then we can also imagine that spirits exist that can make storms happen. And I think in the world of the play, it's real. And for us in mounting it, we don't have the budget to have people fly in on carpets and swing from trapezes. But that's also part of the magic of theater, is that we don't need any of that stuff, right? We can tell a story, and you in the audience or anyone listening can picture, right, or imagine. And so we're going to really be playing around with staging that does not try to hide that we're on a stage, but that involves all of us in that wonderful magical act of imagining that someone's flying when they're really just walking on stage.
I see in the chat, how much role do new actors get to gain experience in these performances? I feel like that's kind of a question for me as artistic director of like,
Yes.
we have a range of folks from, Alex came to us from being an alternate on our tour this year, and is newer in the professional world as an actor. And we have folks who, like Idris, she's been here.
Right.
She has been here and has done the thing and is ready to go. And we have all aspects all throughout. And some may be more comfortable in the movement, some may be more comfortable in the music. There's always things to learn, and we have Rotimi will be uplifting movement. I will look at some fights. We have an intimacy director coming in. We also have, for new this year, a voice and text director coming in to work with everyone to uplift and share folks' voices versus the anglicized Shakespearean voice that some people might think is real, but that's not real. Yes, the tour, SF Shakespeare on tour. 55 minutes total. That's a 45-minute show plus 5 actors. We go all over to schools, community centers, senior centers. That's a great opportunity for new actors who are non-union coming in to work with us and get a paid a salary for the week to be an actor. Any other questions, y'all? While we're waiting for folks to put in chat, I know some things that came in. There were a lot of questions about Caliban. And like whether Caliban is representing colonialism, including Ariel, like where's Ariel and Caliban on that spectrum? And is Caliban sharing baser human instincts? These are things directly pulled from questions that were sent from you all.
Great. Yeah, I'll speak a little bit about Caliban. Yeah, I think, you know, in reading the play, you know, over and over again as we prepare for this and thinking about it even before proposing, I think with every one of these characters, there's so many dimensions to them. I think they are multifaceted. And I think Caliban is many different things in the play, or has many different aspects to him. The character does. He's in some ways a surrogate child of Prospero. He was there, the child on the island. Prospero arrived with Miranda, washed onto the shore. They were not on some sort of colonizing mission. They were washed onto a shore in a boat that was leaking, you know. So they meet this child, they adopt this child who lives with them. At some point, according to the stories that are told, that both of them acknowledge, there was an attempted assault, sexual assault on Miranda by Caliban. And this fractured the relationship. And I think it evolved it into something where Prospero refers to Caliban as slave and treats him as a slave or a servant, as opposed to a son. And so, and then Caliban, you know, then goes on and plots Prospero's murder, immediately adopting a new master as soon as he gets him, you know, some alcohol from Stefano, right? So there's a lot of I think Caliban, there's a lot to Caliban. I think in some ways you could see Caliban as a villain, you know, someone who tried to do something harmful, right? Whether or not we might say he had the same sense of, you know, I don't know, morality or as Prospero, he was raised by Prospero. So, and I think absolutely there might be echoes of colonialism there. I think people have seen those and pointed this out. And I also think that that there's a relationship there that complicates that, I think, a lot more. There's familial stuff. There's you know, what you do when something's been fractured, when there's been a violation of trust, right? And I think Prospero as a character is all about violations of trust. That's a theme that he revolves around, being betrayal, right? And Caliban is another source of betrayal. Right, and Caliban also feels betrayed. He says to Caliban, you know, Prospero, I came here, I loved you, I showed you all these things in the island, and now you keep me confined in this rock. So there's all these themes of betrayal, and I think, you know, the play has so many explorations of the idea of freedom, of the idea of betrayal, of the idea of slavery, right? It could be something in terms of being someone's servant, it can be something in terms of being someone's lover. I mean, Ferdinand refers himself as a slave to Miranda, or a slave of his love. So I think what the play asks us to do is to consider different meanings of these words or these terms or these experiences people have or profess to have. And for me, what's exciting is the ability or the opportunity to explore all those different things and not to insist on one particular version of it or one particular facet of it as being the one that we're going to focus on.
Rotimi, it's what's fascinating, what's always been interesting to me is if you look at the play on the page for a moment, if you just look at the play as it was printed in the first folio, indeed, if you go back to, primus inter pares, the first source. The first word in Tempest in its printed version is master. And the last word in Tempest is free. And so it's, you know, there is scope there for exactly the kind of exploration that you're talking about, Rotimi. And again, I see likely conscious, but perhaps even unconscious intentionality in that framing between a play that starts with master and ends with free. That's interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm just like, yes, y'all keep putting things in the chat. I'm seeing a question from please forgive me if I pronounced your name wrong, Bernard. Bernard, I know we've been emailing back and forth. I'm so glad that you're back with us this time. What will audience members find most surprising about this staging of the play?
Oh, that's a great question, Bernard. And I laugh because I don't know. We haven't staged it yet. So I hope you come and see and tell us what you find surprising. I will say that we are yeah, I mean we're playing with, you know, we have a wonderful, beautiful set designed and built by Neil Ormond, and there's a simplicity to our set. There's an essentialism, right? We're playing with the idea this is a fable, it's a fairy tale, right? And so it lives in the world of the imagination, and also it comes to life through the bodies and movement of the storytellers and the few props that we'll have. So I think in that sense, people might be surprised to see that it's not the most realistic set if they expect, and you know, to come to theater and see a sort of realism set. This will be a set of that's open to a lot of suggestion and imagination. So that I think will be surprising to some people, and we hope to discover surprising ways of using the set, ways that will surprise and delight and play with the idea of theatrical magic as well, right? The magic of the play. How do we create magic with theater? And then so hopefully there'll be lots of surprising moments, and I cannot wait to discover what those are and to share those with you.
There are a couple of feel free to keep putting stuff in the chat. It is 12:52, but there's a couple of questions that I think I can address. Christine, thank you for your message. At this time, we do not have any planned performances in the East Bay. And Sharon, at this time, we're talking about Rotimi's vision of the Tempest. However, we have we got lucky, our assistant director, Eli Sunny Orquiza, is also our dramaturg. We have 2 literary interns, and they have been working on supplementing folks, like, so that they've got a great thing that we're waiting to get pictures of folks in costume to share. Because another question that came up earlier was there's so many lords going on, and we'll have pictures of actors in the costumes to share who they are, what characters they are, and a breakdown of the story. And that will be in things that you can access through our website, like for a program dramaturg in our blog, and you'll be able to get a lot of that information. And then where else?
Oh, sorry. So there's a question about the lords and keeping them, you know, straight. Is that, sorry, what you're referring to, Carla?
Is there no, share Rotimi.
You mentioned the thing about the lords, there being so many lords, and I was curious.
Yes, there's so many lords. Yes, somebody sent in from when they RSVP'd, talked about there's so many lords that are you know, they're coming from the wedding of the king, Alonso. They're coming from his daughter's wedding, and there's so many lords in attendance on that boat. And the lords are the ones who end up on the island wandering around, whereas all the folks who are working on the ship, they're left undisturbed on the ship to sleep it off magically until they're woken and brought in. I do want to uplift Ron. How do we get more young people to experience the magic of SF Shakes this summer? Well, come on, Ron. Invite them, bring them. We have so many places that we have Cupertino, we have Redwood City, we have San Francisco. It's all on our website. Get groups of young people that you know, bring together your knitting group, your painting group. We have a painting group that does come and does ad hoc painting of the costumes and the scenes, which is that's the thing. I used to bring my fellow moms of baby boot camp. We would come and have a mom's night out, have our vino and our brie and our picnic. Bring your picnic. Come on, bring your folks. Yes. Alan, try telling them they cannot go. It's free. It's free. Come on and join us. It's 12:55. I do want to make sure that we keep things up to an hour. For those of you who are spending your lunch hours with us, we so appreciate it. But we do have a few minutes left that if you're welcome to say thank you and bye and visit the rest of this when it's recorded and put on our YouTube channel. But if you are willing to stay a little bit longer, I know that Dan and Rotimi are happy to talk through some of these questions for a few more minutes.
Carla, one thing that does come to my mind as we were thinking about the large number of lords. I don't know whether the collective noun is a gaggle or a flock of lords.
A flock of lords.
But one of the things that is interesting is how different their political ideas turn out to be. And Shakespeare actually does show us this. We see Gonzalo's ideas about the peaceable commonwealth and a utopian sensibility. We can infer Naples and Antonio's realpolitik in the treaty that they made, which wound up in Prospero being expelled from Milan. So there's a gaggle of lords, but the lords have very different ideas and perspectives about things, and they wind up meeting very different ends in the play. So it's kind of interesting. It's an interesting device.
Absolutely. And I think, just to speak a little bit about the design of the show or the world we're building, it's a contemporary looking world, contemporary with a twist, fantasy version. And so we really were playing what are each of the archetypes of each of these characters, and specifically the lords, right? And so in our production, the lords are all in blue suits. They're the blue suits. But they're very distinct blue suited people, right? Alonso is the CEO. His, in the most put together suit. Antonio is, as you mentioned, realpolitik. His, we're sort of playing around with the idea of him being kind of a genie kind of character. He's the the one who wants to, who really is wielding power, really wants, and then Gonzalo, yes, is probably in a sweater underneath his blue suit or something, and it's kind of maybe has some Marxist sympathies or something, but is still working in the administration.
Mr. Rogers among the
exactly the Mr. Rogers of the administration. And so I think even in the costuming and certainly in the performances, and then bringing them to life, it'll be hopefully clear to the audience the distinctness of each of these people and their own distinct approach or distinct politics or distinct goals and personality and the ends that they arrive at.
Speaking of goals and things, I want to uplift in the chat. We have a question from Paul about the end is the beginning, is the how to dramatize a sense at the end when it's come where there is hopefully the reunion of sorts, the forgiveness, but then it's also a new beginning. It's a new beginning for Miranda and Ferdinand. It's a new beginning potentially between the brothers and Prospero starting over again. How to dramatize that is the question that that Paul has brought up.
Yeah, great question, Paul. I think we'll discover that as we rehearse. But I also think that, yeah, I think, the way we dramatize that is to really is to honor each moment of the play and what's happening there, right? Not to shy away from the conflict or the difficulties that arise, right? Because I think part of the joy and satisfaction of the end comes because we witness the real struggle, right? We don't know at the beginning. I think part of it, yeah, is entering this like we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if Prosper's going to forgive them. We don't know if he's gonna, when Miranda comes in and says, "Dad, stop the storm. Are you doing this?" We don't know if he's doing it until he says, "Oh yeah, I'm doing it." Let me tell you why I'm doing it. Okay, right? I think we're gonna try to approach it that way, not assume anyone knows anything about the play. Like, okay, this guy comes on stage. Who is he? I don't know. What is he doing? Right? And he's gonna tell us who he is and why he's doing it. And we're gonna have to decide in the audience, is this legit? I don't know. Should he be doing this? Right? Then someone else comes on and says, "You did this. You stole this island from me." Oh, he stole the island from this other guy. Oh, I don't know if he's a good guy, right? And so, at each stage of the journey, we're going to try not to, tell the audience, who anyone is or what, I mean, they'll, predetermine anyone's experience of it. I think, let's honor each thing and each step and each uncertainty um, until we get to as along the journey, and then we get to whatever happens at the end, and go, oh, that's where it was all heading, and that's what this whole rollicking, bizarre journey has led us to, and so that's going to be our goal and our hope as we rehearse it, and we hope as you watch it that you go along on that ride and that it leads to an ending that feels satisfactory and revelatory.
Yeah, and to also address to Sharon about an outline and for folks, because we at SF Shakes believe in the power of the themes of Shakespeare and making them accessible to everyone. What we do and what we hold true is that our assistant director takes a pre-show, as it were, which is about 7 to 10 minutes before the show, usually to help to connect the audience. Many of our audience members come to us from different, like we have a diaspora of audience members. Some are Shakespeare folk who will sit, I'm not kidding you, in the front row with the Shakespeare tome in front of them and go line by line. And we also have experienced folks who are in the park coming by, seeing it, and join us. And some folks who are joining us, maybe English is not their first language, but they understand and are able to follow the storyline. Or maybe Shakespeare is just newer to them, or they felt that, oh, there's a boundary. Part of the pre-show is to help along the lines of what Shakespeare used to do all the time. If y'all have read Shakespeare, he repeats himself a lot, because there are people moving and mingling who are in the groundlings from the old globe. And repeating information is really helpful to make sure folks are still grounded in the story. So the pre-show will have some grounding in what characters you're going to see and kind of set folks up of what they're going to see.
And it's also, Carla, it's also one of the things that I've seen consistently in audience reactions to Shakespeare, and in particular in the reactions of young people and the reactions of people who have not previously had a lot of exposure to Shakespeare. People often come in with the idea that the language is a barrier, and yet 10 minutes into the production, the vividness with which Shakespeare renders these human characters, people literally, it just sloughs right off their backs. People completely forget that they were coming to this with the idea that this was hard to understand or difficult. They will get this, literally into it. And part of that is because of the excellent work that Rotimi and his cast will do. But part of that is because Shakespeare's people are so vividly recognizable as people whom you might encounter in your own life that even young people without background, it's like jumping into the swimming pool. They'll do it. They'll swim by the end of the production, I'm sure of it.
All right. Well, it is 1:04. I don't see any more questions in the chat if there's anything else, but
Then we need we
okay,
need to we need to give a huge round of internet applause to Rotimi for joining us and for taking the time to talk with us. We are just hugely grateful, Rotimi. It's just
it was my pleasure. Thank you.
and to you, Dan, thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. One last, I would like to close this out as we do a lot of times in our in workshops that we do, in camps, in rehearsals. Dan, Rotimi, one word, and feel free for those of you all watching, put it in the chat. One word of something that is sticking with you or you're excited about in the Tempest. One word. What is that one word, Dan? Go.
joy. Joy.
Magic for me, I think.
Yes. Oh, I'm loving these magic, surprise, set, curiosity, reconciliation, forgiveness, redemption. Oh, yes. Gratitude. Thank you, Rotimi.
Thank you, Rotimi.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. And I hope you join us on our next Let's Talk About.
And come see us in the park this summer. We'll be there. We want to see you there too.
Thanks, y'all.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.